My brother claimed the entire estate, until Grandma's second will appeared 72 hours. That's all I had before my brother signed away everything our grandmother built, and I stood outside that lawyer's office with a manila envelope shaking in my hands, knowing that if I was wrong about what was inside it, I would lose my family forever. My name is Marin. 3 days earlier, my brother Connor stood in our grandmother's kitchen, the kitchen where she taught both of us to make her pierogi, the kitchen that still smelled like her rosewater hand cream, and told me with a smile I will never forget that the house, the business, and every account she'd built over 60 years now belonged to him. Alone. "It's just business, Marin," he said. "Don't make this weird. I want you to remember that sentence. 'Cause by the end of this story, that sentence is going to mean something very different to him." What he didn't know, what none of us knew yet, was that our grandmother had left something behind. Something she'd hidden for a reason. Something with a deadline attached to it, ticking down the second the county clerk's office opened on Monday morning. He thought he'd already won. He had no idea the clock was running on him too. But before I tell you how everything fell apart, you need to know how it started. I grew up the quiet one. Connor was loud, charming, the kind of kid teachers remembered by name and other parents adored. I was the one curled up in the corner of Grandma's sunroom with a library book, half listening to her stories about the bakery she ran in the 70s, back when a single mother starting a business was something people warned her against. She used to say I had her hands, meaning I noticed things. Small things. The way a recipe needed one more minute of resting dough, the way a person's voice changed half a second before they lied. Our parents weren't really in the picture growing up. My dad left when I was 6, my mom worked 2 jobs and leaned hard on Grandma to raise us. So Grandma wasn't just a grandmother. She was the architecture of my whole childhood. She taught me to balance a checkbook before I could legally drive. She taught me that dignity wasn't loud. Connor she taught differently. Or maybe he just learned differently. He learned that charm got him out of trouble faster than honesty did. By 16 he was already running small schemes, reselling concert tickets, talking his way out of speeding tickets, borrowing money he had no plan to return. Grandma called it main character energy with a laugh that, looking back, had something tired underneath it. I became a high school chemistry teacher. Table. Unremarkable by Connor's standards. He became a consultant, which seemed to mean different things every time I asked him about it. We weren't close as adults, but we weren't enemies either. We showed up to the same holidays. We sent the same group texts on Grandma's birthday. I genuinely believed for most of my adult life that whatever happened to our family's small inheritance, the modest 2-story house, Grandma's old bakery building she still owned downtown, the savings she'd quietly built, would be split fairly. 'Cause that's what fair people do. I should have paid more attention to the years before her death. 'Cause looking back now, the warning signs were always there. I just didn't want to see them. Something about the way Grandma started looking at Connor in her last year, not adoring like before. Careful. Like she was watching him the way you watch a stove burner you're not sure you turned off. Started small the way these things always do. 8 months before Grandma passed, Connor moved into her house to help out. Paper, that sounded generous. In practice, it meant he had access to her mail, her bank statements, her medication schedule, and eventually, her lawyer's phone number. I noticed the first red flag at Thanksgiving. Grandma mentioned, almost in passing, that she'd updated some paperwork with the house. When I asked what that meant, Connor cut in before she could answer. "Just boring legal stuff, March. You don't need to worry about it. You don't need to worry about it." I'd hear that phrase a lot over the following months, and every time it meant the opposite. Then there was the matter of her phone. Grandma had used the same flip phone for a decade, refusing every attempt to upgrade her. Suddenly she had a smartphone Connor had bought her, with Connor's email linked to it, with Connor helping her set up online banking for convenience. I brought it up to my mother once. She just sighed and said, "Connor's always been better with that stuff. Let him handle it." That was the family pattern. Let Connor handle it, because Connor was confident, and confidence has always been mistaken for competence in our family. The strangest moment came in February, 4 months before Grandma died. I stopped by unannounced, something I rarely did, and found Grandma sitting at the kitchen table with a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. Papers were spread out between them. The moment I walked in, the man gathered the documents with a speed that struck me as rehearsed, and Grandma's smile looked performed. "Just a financial advisor, sweetheart," she said. "Connor set it up." I didn't think much of it then. I wish I had. That night I texted Connor asking who the man was. He didn't respond for 6 hours. When he finally did, it was one line. "Don't worry about it, it's handled." Handled. Another word I'd come to dread. I didn't know it yet, but that financial advisor wasn't a financial advisor at all. And the paperwork on that table wasn't an update. It was the beginning of the end. Grandma passed in May. Quietly in her sleep, the way she always said she wanted to go. I was the one who found her the next morning when she didn't answer her phone for our weekly call, and I drove over out of instinct. I won't describe what that morning felt like. I don't think words are built for it. What I will tell you is what happened 9 days later, when our family gathered at the law office of Harold Whitfield, Grandma's longtime attorney, a man who'd handled her affairs since before I was born, for the reading of her will. I expected a fair split. A house divided, savings divided, the bakery building sold, and the proceeds split. That's what we'd always assumed, what Grandma had always implied in the soft, vague way older people talk about money. "You kids will be taken care of." Instead, Harold cleared his throat and read a will dated 4 months earlier, February, that left almost the entire estate to Connor. The house. The bakery building. 90% of her savings. I received a small keepsake fund and her recipe box. I sat there in silence while my brother's face did something I will never forget, not surprise. Relief. Like a man who'd been holding his breath for months finally exhaling. "She wanted this," he said quietly, not quite meeting my eyes. "We talked about it." Harold cleared his throat again, and I noticed something, a flicker of discomfort on his face that didn't match a routine reading. "This is the most recent will on file," he said carefully. "Dated February the 14th. February. The same month I'd walked in on Grandma and the stranger at her kitchen table. I asked Harold, right there in the room, who had drafted that will. He hesitated before answering. "It wasn't drafted by this office," he said. "I only received the executed copy by mail, 3 weeks before her passing." The room went quiet. Even Connor's confidence flickered just slightly, just for a second, and that second told me everything I needed to know. Someone else had drafted that will. And it hadn't come from Grandma's regular lawyer, who'd handled every legal document of hers for 30 years. That's when I realized something was very wrong. What followed wasn't grief. It was a campaign. Within a week, Connor had changed the locks on Grandma's house. When I asked for time to go through her belongings, photographs, the recipe box, things with no monetary value but everything sentimental, he told me in front of our mother that I was being dramatic over things that don't even matter. When I pushed back gently, asking simply for a conversation about the timing of that February will, Connor's tone shifted into something I'd never heard him use with me before. "You're upset because you got less than you expected. That's all this is. Don't make Grandma's death about money, Marin. That's disgusting." He said this while standing in a kitchen he now legally owned, having received 90% of an estate he hadn't built a single brick of. He started talking to our extended family before I could. Cousins I rarely heard from started sending me carefully neutral texts, "Hope you're doing okay, heard things have been tense," and I realized he was managing the narrative before I'd even said a word publicly. Painting me, quietly, as the bitter sibling unable to accept Grandma's final wishes. At a family dinner 3 weeks after the funeral, my aunt asked gently why I seemed so distant. Connor answered for me. "Marin's still adjusting to Grandma's decision. It's been hard for her." I sat there and let it happen because grief makes you slow, and I was still grieving Grandma and now apparently my brother too, the version of him I'd believed existed. Then he made a mistake. He posted a photo from the bakery building, his bakery building now, with the caption, "New chapter." Grandma would be proud. 43 likes. Comments calling him such a good grandson. I sat with my phone in my hand and felt something shift in my chest. Not sadness anymore. Something colder. Something that didn't go away. I thought about February. I thought about the man in the gray suit. I thought about Harold's careful hesitation in that office. And I thought, if Connor truly believed this will was legitimate, he wouldn't need to manage everyone's perception of it this hard. That's when I stopped grieving quietly and started paying attention. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. Not my mother, who I knew would side with peace over truth. Not my friends, who would have told me to let it go for my own sake. I told no one because I needed to move without anyone managing me the way Connor had managed everyone else. I started small. I requested a copy of the February will from Harold's office, along with the postmark date on the envelope it had arrived in. I pulled Grandma's old calendar from a drawer in her sunroom before Connor noticed it was gone. She still kept a paper calendar, old-fashioned, the same one she'd used for decades. February 14th had a notation on it. Not the will. A single word written in her handwriting that I won't share yet, because I didn't understand its meaning at the time either. I drove to the bakery building and talked to Eleanor, the woman who'd worked the front counter for Grandma for 19 years. She didn't know about the will, but she told me something that made my stomach drop. That in her final months, Grandma had asked Eleanor, almost in passing, to keep a spare set of keys to a storage unit somewhere safe just in case. A storage unit. Grandma had never mentioned a storage unit in her life. I found the receipt in a shoebox of old papers Connor hadn't bothered to go through yet. He'd taken the house, but he hadn't taken the time to actually look at what was in it. The receipt was for a unit at a self-storage facility 11 miles away, paid annually in cash going back 4 years. I didn't go inside yet. I wasn't ready. I needed to understand what I was walking into first. I called an estate attorney, not Harold, someone unconnected to my family entirely, and asked hypothetically what it would mean if a will was discovered to have been drafted under undue influence, or worse, drafted by someone other than the deceased's longtime trusted counsel. She told me 3 words that I held on to like a lifeline. It can be contested. I didn't tell Connor any of this. I let him keep believing he'd already won. 'Cause the moment he realized I was looking, he would start covering tracks faster than I could find them. What I didn't expect was what happened next. A phone call 2 days later from a number I didn't recognize that changed the entire timeline of what I thought I had. Call was from a county clerk's office. A form Connor had filed, to formally transfer the deed of the bakery building into his name, had been flagged for a routine title search, and the clerk, who'd apparently known Grandma personally for years from her morning coffee runs, mentioned something to me that made my blood run cold. There's a notice on file requesting any additional testamentary documents be submitted within 90 days of the original probate filing. Did you know about that? I hadn't. Connor certainly hadn't mentioned it. The 90-day window was already burning down, and I had no idea how much time was actually left until I checked the filing date myself. 72 hours. 3 days. After that window closed, any additional will, if one existed, would require a much harder, costlier court contest instead of a straightforward amendment to probate. That same week, Connor escalated further. He decided to hold what he called a family celebration dinner at the bakery building, under the guise of honoring Grandma's memory, but really I understood instantly, to formally announce his renovation plans to the extended family and cement the narrative that the transition was settled, blessed, complete. He invited everyone. Aunts, cousins, our mother. He did not initially invite me. When our mother insisted, he relented with visible irritation, telling her, "Fine, but I don't want this turning into a thing." That dinner, surrounded by people who'd known Grandma for decades, Connor stood up and gave a toast about continuing Grandma's legacy the right way, while standing inside a building he'd received through paperwork from a stranger in a gray suit. I watched my aunt cry, genuinely moved. I watched my mother nod along. and I understood with a clarity that almost hurt that if I didn't act in the next 72 hours, this version of events, Connor as the dutiful heir, me as the bitter outsider, would become the permanent family record. I left early. I didn't say goodbye to Connor. In the car, I called the storage facility to confirm their hours for the next morning. That's when I found the second shock of the night, a voicemail from earlier that day from a number I didn't recognize. A woman's voice, elderly, careful. "Marin, this is Eleanor. I think you should come by the shop before you go anywhere else tomorrow. There's something I should have given you sooner." Eleanor was waiting at the bakery's back door before sunrise, a worn cardboard box in her hands. "Your grandmother gave this to me 18 months ago," she said. "She told me if anything ever felt wrong with how things were divided after she passed, I should give it to you. Not Connor. You." Inside the box was a sealed envelope and a single brass key. The envelope contained a letter dated over a year before her death, long before the mysterious February will, long before Connor moved in to help. In her own handwriting, unmistakably hers, Grandma wrote about her fears, about a financial advisor who'd approached Connor with an opportunity she didn't trust, about conversations with Connor that left her uneasy, about money already missing from accounts she could no longer fully track because Connor had taken over the passwords. And at the bottom, a single sentence that I read 4 times before it fully landed. "If anything happens to the will I signed with Harold years ago, the real one is where Eleanor knows to look, and the key opens what protects it." The key. The storage unit. I called the attorney I'd consulted earlier that morning, this time not hypothetically. I told her everything, the letter, the key, the storage unit, the 90-day filing window closing in under 3 days. She told me to meet her there within the hour, with a witness present before opening anything to preserve the chain of custody. Inside the unit, a fireproof lockbox. Inside the lockbox, a will executed 4 years earlier, long before Connor moved in, long before any financial advisor appeared, properly witnessed, properly notarized, with Harold's own law office seal on the final page, dated and signed in front of 2 witnesses whose names I recognized as longtime family friends. This will split the estate evenly between Connor and me. And it explicitly named Harold's firm, not anyone else, as the only authorized drafter of any future amendments to her estate plan. The February will hadn't just come from someone other than her trusted attorney. It had been drafted in direct violation of a clause Grandma had written into her real will, specifically to prevent exactly what had happened. My attorney looked at me and said quietly, "This changes everything. But we need to move fast." 72 hours had become 48. We filed the original will with the probate court that same afternoon, formally contesting the February document and requesting an emergency hearing given the closing 90-day window. My attorney warned me Connor would be notified within hours. Called me 4 times before I picked up. When I finally did, his voice was tight in a way I'd never heard. "What did you do?" "I found Grandma's real will, Connor." Silence. Then, "There's no other will. You're grasping at something because you're angry. Then you won't mind explaining who drafted the February one." Harold didn't. The silence that followed told me more than any answer could have. He tried a different approach within the hour, a text softer this time, almost pleading. "Can we talk before this goes anywhere official? Family shouldn't do this in a courtroom." I almost believed the change in tone meant something. Then I remembered the toast at the bakery, the locks he'd changed within a week of the funeral, the months of, "You don't need to worry about it." The emergency hearing was scheduled for the next morning, the same courthouse where, 2 days later, the will would have been finalized beyond contest. My mother called me in tears, asking why I hadn't told her sooner, asking if this would tear the family apart permanently. "It's already torn apart, Mom," I told her. "I just found out why." I arrived at the courthouse the next morning with my attorney, the original will, the lockbox, and Eleanor as a witness. Connor arrived 10 minutes later with his own lawyer, and the same man in the gray suit I'd seen at Grandma's kitchen table 8 months earlier, sitting 2 rows behind him. The judge called the room to order. Every chair in that gallery was full. My mother sat in the front row, hands clasped tight, looking between her two children like she still didn't fully understand how this had happened. I had never been more nervous in my life. And I had never been more certain I was right. My attorney began methodically laying out each piece of evidence one at a time, letting each one breathe before moving to the next. Item 1. The original will, executed 4 years earlier, properly notarized through Harold's office, naming an even split between both grandchildren. Harold himself, called as a witness, confirmed under oath that this was the only will his office had ever drafted on Grandma's behalf, and that the explicit clause within it required any amendments to come exclusively through his firm. Connor's lawyer objected. The judge overruled, asking Harold to continue. Connor's jaw tightened. Item 2. The February will and the postmark on the envelope it arrived in, mailed not from Grandma's home address but from an office complex 11 miles away, the same address belonging to a financial consulting firm that, according to state licensing records my attorney had pulled the day before, was not licensed to draft legal estate documents. The man in the gray suit shifted in his seat. A few gasps rippled through the gallery. Item 3. Grandma's handwritten letter to Eleanor, dated over a year before her death, describing her growing unease about Connor's involvement with this consulting firm and missing funds from her accounts. My mother's hand came up to her mouth. This was the first she was hearing any of it. Item 4. Bank records subpoenaed 2 days earlier, showing 4 transfers totaling almost $40,000 from Grandma's primary account into an account linked to the same consulting firm, all occurring within the 6 weeks before the February will was executed. Payments, my attorney argued, that lined up suspiciously with the timeline of when that will had been drafted. The gallery had gone completely silent. Connor stared straight ahead, his confidence from the will reading 9 weeks earlier nowhere in sight. Item 5. The final piece. A notarized statement from one of the 2 witnesses listed on the original will, an old family friend, confirming she had personally watched Grandma sign that document with full clarity of mind, specifically telling her at the time, "I want this protected no matter what anyone tries later." The judge looked at Connor's lawyer. "Counsel, would you like a recess to confer with your client?" Connor didn't wait for his lawyer to answer. He stood up. "This is insane," Connor said, his voice cracking in a way I'd never heard from him. "She wanted me to have it. We talked about it before she died." "Did you discuss it with her or with him?" my attorney asked calmly, gesturing toward the man in the gray suit, who was already edging toward the exit. Connor didn't answer. The judge asked Connor's own lawyer directly whether his client could produce any independent verification of the February will's drafting circumstances, any communication with Harold's office, any witness present at signing who wasn't connected to the consulting firm. There was none. His lawyer's silence said more than Connor's denials ever could. I watched my brother, the boy who'd once talked our way out of a speeding ticket at 17 by sheer charm alone, stand in front of a judge with nothing to say. No charm fixes evidence. No confidence rewrites bank records. "I didn't think it would go this far," he finally said, quieter now, almost to himself. "It went exactly as far as the truth," my attorney replied. The judge ordered an immediate freeze on all estate transfers pending a full forensic review of the February will and the financial transactions surrounding it, citing clear and compelling evidence of undue influence and improper drafting. The original will, the judge stated, would stand as the governing document unless overturned through further proceedings. Connor's case had almost no foundation to win. Connor left the courthouse without speaking to anyone. My mother stayed behind, sitting in that gallery for a long time after everyone else had gone, finally understanding what those quiet months had actually been. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted and sad and relieved all at once, the way justice often feels when it costs you something on the way to arriving. In the weeks that followed, the estate was formally redistributed according to Grandma's original wishes. An even split, exactly as she'd intended, exactly as she'd protected with that clause 4 years before any of this began. I didn't take Connor's portion out of spite, even though legally I could have pushed harder given the fraud findings. I told my attorney I wanted the original will honored as written, 50-50, because that's what Grandma actually wanted, and punishing Connor beyond what the truth required wasn't justice. It was just more anger dressed differently. I did, however, insist on one thing: full transparency with the rest of the family about what had actually happened. Not to humiliate Connor, but because I refused to spend the rest of my life being quietly known as the bitter sister while he kept his manufactured story intact. I sat down with my mother, just the two of us, and told her everything calmly without venom. She cried, not for the money, she said, but because she hadn't protected Grandma from whatever had been happening in that house in her final year. You couldn't have known, I told her. None of us could. That's exactly what he counted on. I haven't spoken to Connor since the hearing. Not out of cruelty, I genuinely don't know what there is left to say to someone who watched our grandmother's final months turn into an opportunity rather than a goodbye. What I kept more than the money was the recipe box. The handwritten notes and the margins. Proof that she trusted me enough to leave a trail only I would think to follow. 6 months later, the bakery building reopened, not under Connor's renovation plans but restored close to how Grandma always ran it, with Eleanor still behind the counter, now as part owner. I split my half of the inheritance toward keeping it running because some things matter more than profit margins. The forensic review confirmed everything we'd suspected. Consulting firm lost its operating license within the state after the case drew regulatory attention. The man in the gray suit was named in a separate civil suit by 2 other elderly clients who'd experienced something similar. Connor was never criminally charged, the case settled in probate court, but the financial cost of his failed contest combined with the legal fees left him with a fraction of what he'd originally schemed for. My mother and I are closer now than we've been in years. Grief in the end didn't tear us apart, the truth did the opposite. Gave us something honest to stand on again. I think about Grandma constantly. Not the will, not the courtroom, the kitchen. Pierogi. The sunroom with the library books. I think about the fact that even in her final year, frightened and unsure who to trust, she still found a way to protect the people she loved. That's the legacy I choose to remember. Not the fight. The reason I fought. If you were in my position, would you have split the estate evenly once you'd proven the fraud, or would you have taken what the law allowed you to take? Have you or someone you know ever dealt with a family member trying to manipulate an inheritance? I'd genuinely like to hear your story in the comments below. Sometimes the hardest part of these situations isn't proving the truth, it's deciding what kind of person you want to be once you have.